This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're on the air with Brenda Neckvatal, right? I got it right.
Got it. You're close.
I always get it wrong.
We're good. No
But
one gets it
yeah,
right.
you have the yobrenda.com, which is below, so you can click on that, and that will be fully clickable when we're published on all the platforms. We're live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch right now. And want to thank you for being a guest on the podcast. How you doing tonight?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm doing really well, thanks. How are you?
Doing pretty good. We're here in the great state of New Hampshire, so
Ah,
it's always fun. We get to talk to people from all over the world, but we're in
yep.
New Hampshire. A couple of things we always ask anybody who's on the podcast before we get into talking about your story is what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
Oh man. What motivates me? It motivates me. So what I do is I actually help leaders kind of slice through the drama and help them level up their teams so then that way they can reach new levels of success. I love doing that. I love helping people cut through a lot of the people issues that leaders experience. It's something that I'm innately good at. I have this thing where I can find patterns. Like I'm one of those weirdos that can stand next to an engine and I can listen to it and tell you that the timing is off. And that's not an easy thing to do, right? That's not normal. So I just have this gift and this ability to though we all have gifts. We all have something innately that we do, and that happens to be mine. So it's very rewarding for me to be able to help a struggling leader understand what is likely going to happen with their people and then help them set up like a strategy on how to deal with it. And it could be something simple as somebody constantly coming in and I'm like, I'll bet you 10 to 1 they're just going to sit there and give you a bunch of excuses if you ask the question this way. And I'll get that phone call back. They're like, man, you were right. Like right on the money. So that part is a little bit of a dopamine hit. I won't lie about it. But dealing with people is not easy sometimes. And there's some really difficult ones out there. I mean, there isn't a human being out there in this world that hasn't experienced it.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to do. I mean, we all live in kind of post COVID world. In my day world, I'm an IT analyst, so I've been able to stay remote. And it is challenging sometimes with people. We deal with people on different continents, different time
Mhm.
zones, different cultures. So there's
Yeah.
sometimes different expectations. If you got a global team,
Yes.
sometimes what you say is not what they hear. And a
Yeah.
lot of people might not get that. Like if you're talking to
Yeah.
people like they're in Tokyo or in Korea, sometimes what we say in English is like it sounds like we said it, right? And we understand it, but the mindset, Eastern mindset can be different. I
Yep.
lived in Tokyo for 2 years, and it's like, yeah, there's what you say. Sometimes they don't actually interpret what you think you said the same
Yes.
way.
And that happens here in the United States too. I mean, and it comes from our worldview. I mean, aside from people, let's take the global aspect out of it for a second, but it is really fair to be able to say that somebody that grew up in New York City had a very different upbringing, has a different view of the world than let's say somebody who grew up in like Tucson, Arizona.
Oh yeah,
And I mean, just even communicating within our own country can
yeah.
be sometimes a
Culturally,
challenge.
yeah.
Yeah, because
This
we have
each
all these
city,
subcultures.
the subcultures has like New York has a culture. It's very
Yeah.
and people might be abrupt, and they might think that's okay. You might somebody in Idaho might say, well, that person's rude. Or a
What a jerk.
southerner might say, that's not that's not southern hospitality.
Yeah.
You seem kind of really like you're not making me have that good feeling like the southern comfort. So
Yeah.
I'm not getting that.
Yeah.
So
No, I hear you. I mean, when I moved, so my family's from Hawaii. When I moved to Hawaii and became a resident over there for a while, I learned very quickly that if you're 30 minutes late, you're on time. I grew up in Pennsylvania. That didn't happen.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, well, like we've got that thing with like a lot of sometimes like I deal with people in my culture and being late is not such a big deal sometimes for certain people. And if I'm living in a Fortune 500 world and like you can't be a half hour late to the meeting
No,
because the meeting's
no.
a half hour. So he's like,
Yeah.
you just missed it. Like so it's like that might work there in the Delta, but it doesn't work here.
No, not at all.
But it's interesting, like yeah, because the subcultures is like you got different areas, the Eastern culture versus the Northern culture, Western culture. It's like it's all these different things, and then you got the microcosm of each
Yeah.
just individuals,
Yeah.
and you got types of personalities. So how much like, because I was a sociology major, so how much sociology and psychology is in what you do, and maybe you've kind of learned that you have talents that are actually equate to like sociological patterns or psychological patterns that you just kind of learned it like from life lessons.
Yeah. So, I actually academically did study a little bit of sociology. I've never studied psychology. Um, so I'm a slow learner when it comes to, I'm behind the curve probably when it comes to psychology. But what I have learned is that in what I do, and like I joke around that I'm a recovering human resource professional from 30 years, right? And I'm affectionately known as the Grim Reaper. Um, But what I've learned is that anytime you have somebody that flares up, doesn't matter if it's an employee, could be a friend, could be within a social construct, could be in a volunteer construct, could be client, right? There's always a trigger. There's
Mm,
always something that's happened. And good leaders will keep their radar open for those moments that where somebody clacks off, right? The ones that don't pay attention are the ones that struggle the most because there's always a reason. Now, whether it's a reason that was justified or not is a completely different thing, right?
yeah.
But when somebody does a hard left on you, something has happened somewhere. And if you don't figure that out, you know that there's going to be a consistent disturbance in the force like all the
Yeah.
time.
It's gonna this thing they to get rid of all the harmony is like disharmony. Like I'm a musician,
Yeah.
it's like you're looking for well then now there's discordance when I wanted harmony. If something's
Yes.
out of tune, it's out of it's off key, it's
Yes.
out of sync, it's not on the tempo, it's not on the beat. You can hear it, you know it. Like it's
You
like as
got
soon as I hear it, like it's supposed to be 3/4, you're not doing 3/4.
Yeah,
What
it's like you've got that gray cloud following you everywhere you go, and you don't really know what it is.
Mhm. We
That's
gotta have
because
that yeah,
you
situational
mistreated it.
awareness, I guess,
Yeah.
to pick up on it because like if you're just somebody that likes to go on your plan, well that situation is not in your plan. So as soon as that happens, like, well, how do you respond to something that wasn't on your radar?
Yeah. And sometimes too is that you can tell that something might be a little off, but a lot of people will never ask about it.
Mm,
They'll just chuck it off maybe to something else, or they don't know if they should ask about it. They don't think it's important enough to ask. I mean, there's like a litany of reasons why somebody wouldn't ask about it or inquire about it. And and that's one of the things that I've started teaching people how to do is like ask them, what's the most important thing that they want to see from this situation? Because if
mm,
you don't and you try and resolve it, you may only hit 80% of the solution. And that 20% is going to haunt you for the rest of your next engagement with them. They'll I have one of my very, very favorite mentors out there, and he says there are no justified resentments, but somebody can hang on to something for a long time and
yeah.
think that they got chided or shortened and think that maybe it's not even their responsibility to bring it up. But if a leader sees something that's off and they don't ask ask the right kind of questions, because I believe that when you ask good questions, you get great answers. You get good answers. You ask bad questions, you're going to get bad answers. So if you don't know how to ask it, when to ask it, then you're missing an opportunity to have a really great open dialogue. You're in Fortune 500. You know how this goes, right? I've been in it too. When that one person withholds one piece of information that makes a difference into everything, and you're like, okay, why didn't we talk about this 6 months ago? Or 6 hours ago? or whatever it was, right? Because that could have changed the whole outcome. And now we have to kind of backtrack. We got to clean up. We got to, it's just like people don't think to ask and people don't think to speak.
Well, it's always assumptions. Like assumptions always end up being the end of you because a lot of times like, you try to plan as much as you can, but like if people don't give you all the information, like the classic when what we deal with in IT is like when we're doing our JAD sessions, joint application development sessions, is like, okay, like we got to have the upstream and the downstream people there. So
Yeah.
we ask everybody, it's like, is everybody that needs to be in a room in the room?
Yeah.
Everybody says, yeah. Well, how could that be true? Because you know, you won't know if they're like there are people probably that aren't here that need to
Yeah.
be here, right? So because it's always somebody that's always left out, and then you get to the QA development, and suddenly it's like, oh, the guy in this department needs to be involved, and it's really core to what you just designed, and it's not there. And then
Yep.
you're like, well, 6 months ago, how come nobody pointed
Yes.
out that he wasn't there? Well, because he wasn't there.
Yes. Yes. And yeah. And, it's just a matter of working through those things. But, that's part of it. That's a big part of it. And, when you're building a high performing team, it's the good news is that high performing teams tend to really get dialed in on that stuff. Like, you know they are not afraid to step back and say, well, what about this and what about this before they move forward.
Hmm.
And I'll give you an example. One of my favorite examples to talk about this is if you look at the mission that took place with SEAL Team 6, and when they took out Osama bin Laden, they literally locked themselves, and this is open source information, they locked themselves away in conference rooms for a long time. And I'm talking about weeks and months. And they sat down and hashed out everything. They asked, well, what about this? And what about this?
Hmm.
Do we have this? What do we need about it? Like they came up with every potential contingency. They got to a point where they said, not 100, they said, I think we're good. And they got up to leave. And believe it or not, the most junior, youngest person in the whole room stopped and asked the question, well, what would happen if the helicopter crashed?
Nobody brought that
They
up.
sat down and hashed it out again. Right, exactly. So my business partner, William Branham, he's a retired Navy SEAL. We just launched our book this past weekend called Mission Ready, building high performing teams from the battlefield to the boardroom. And the gentleman that actually wrote the foreword for our book was Robert O'Neill. And he was part of that team that took out bin Laden. He actually talks about this from time to time, that it was actually the most junior guy. And sure enough, what had happened is that helicopter, one of the two helicopters that were destined for that particular mission, lost its updraft, and it couldn't gain altitude, and it actually wound up crashing on the compound. Well, the good news is that because they thought about it, that somebody
Yeah,
asked
back
the
up.
question, they were prepared to handle it, and they did.
Yeah, that's the thing is you got to have a backup for the backup sometimes. And if you have like a single point of failure,
Mhm.
like you have to look at all your single points of failure. And then some people say, well, that never goes. It's like, well, that's, what about Murphy's Law?
Yeah, because he'll
Like,
show up.
it's like you have these single points of failure, and people are like, well, there's a chance of that going. It's like, well, you better
Yeah.
think about it because, and then also like when you're dealing with like difficult people, the one thing I remember in Japan was the etiquette of kind of correcting somebody in public, like
Oh,
in
they
the
do get
Japanese
that.
mindset, like you can't really do that in the public meeting. You actually need to go off to the side because you'll dishonor the person
Yeah.
and it will cause massive trouble. Like
Yeah.
you won't get alignment again.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And you're right. I mean, like I used to, I had a couple of people that had no problem. My personal experience, I had people that would admonish me openly in public. As a matter of fact, it's interesting that we're talking about this because I was in New York City last weekend, and I was going to write a post about this, but I think I'll share it. So I was 14 years old, and I was traveling with our marching band. And I was not a marching band person. I was just a member of the band, but they were going for a competition. And so we decided, we entered this competition in New Jersey, and they took us through New York City for, you know, the tour and whatnot. We're all high school students, and we were at the World Trade Center at the observation deck. And so it's nighttime. It's absolutely beautiful looking at it back then. And, you know, we came from a generation where you honored and minded your elders.
Hmm.
And so one of the band chaperones had grabbed four of us and thought we had to meet the rest of the group and do a head count down on the street in front of the buses. And so we were downstairs waiting for him. I just followed the instructions of an adult, right? And so first off, our band leader should have never been in charge of taking any students anywhere. Let's just put it that way. He's like, man was so neurotic. It was amazing. But everybody came down, and the first thing he did, I don't know what it was and why it was me, but right there right in front of the World Trade Center, I was getting my butt handed to me for following instructions from somebody else. And I'll tell you what, it absolutely shattered me as a 14-year-old.
Yeah.
And I'm doing what I was told to do by an adult. It
Yeah. An adult
embarrassed the
tells you.
hell
Well,
out
you
of
hear it.
me.
Yeah. If you're a
Yeah.
student, like an adult, you figure like without a chaperone, they must be
Yeah.
telling you the right thing.
Yeah. So two buses full of students that, you know, we all know each other. And now I am like, you know, spit flying in my face and everything.
Oh, geez.
And so when I was there this past weekend, I went back to that spot. I just happened to be walking by, and I stopped, and I was listening to my AirPods, and it was a tune from the 80s. And you know what I did? I stopped and I just looked, and I looked around, and I let it go. You know, this
Hmm.
39 years. If you
You
do the
can
math,
hold on to things. Yeah. I mean,
doing the
things
math.
can, they, people don't realize how significant, certain behavior is. Like people
Yeah,
don't understand, like, oh, words don't mean anything. Yeah. The words actually,
a lot.
especially if you're young, it was like you can
Oh
imprint,
yeah.
and then it can cause like
Yep.
this like pattern, and you can
Yep.
be stuck into like, you could be in the idea imposter syndrome because somebody said, oh, you're not good enough, or they really were really harsh, right? And you
Yes.
took it, get based on your level of maturity, you took it to heart, where you take it and it's like, oh, well, I'm not good enough, or I made a big mistake. And then that kind of, it just builds in your system till you figure
Yes,
out
it
that you
does.
can get beyond it.
Yep. And that moment on top of other similar moments for me growing up was one of the critical moments that I had as to why I became a massive people pleaser. And I remember the months and the weeks after that, how I was like, I really thought I did something wrong, even though I knew in the back of my mind I didn't.
Hmm.
But I kept trying to make it up to him. You know, I would make recommendations of music. I would go above and beyond. I would do stuff, and he never appreciated it. And that's when I can go back and think in high school as to when I was really acting as a people pleaser. And so that is also another good reason, going back to your original question, as to, you know, I don't want anybody to experience what I experienced in the long haul.
Hmm.
And it absolutely crushed me. And it's kind of interesting that all this kind of came up because I was with Will this past weekend. We launched our book, and he was swimming in the Hudson doing a Navy SEAL swim fundraiser. And I told him about it. And he goes, "Did you really?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "That was like so I stood there in that spot, the very same spot 39 years ago. I had my ass handed to me. And just remember, like I said, there are no justified resentments. So, you know, you have to forgive and forgive and forgive again. And this time I just like, I let it go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's like it's hard to do because a lot of times it's like you got to shake it off. You got to figure
Yeah.
out how to learn. But
Yeah.
sometimes it's like there could be something that you haven't dealt with. Like if you haven't dealt with the underlying like issues that trigger or cause you to be in that feeling, like you don't have that kind of positive mindset, right? Because you get stuck in a loop, and
Yep.
sometimes you can get stuck in these bad loops,
Yep.
and like you figure like, well, how am I going to get out of it?
Yeah.
And you have to have like tutors and mentors and coaches to understand, and you have to talk about it. Like a lot of times people don't ever reveal these things, right?
Yep.
And the boss, well, like if you're in a workplace, if you never tell the boss why you're having such a bad day, why you're being such a like prickly, why you're being so prickly today, well, like how are you gonna know?
That's a
It's
good way of
like,
putting
oh,
it.
it's nothing. It's like nothing. It's like, well, it's
Yeah.
obviously something.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
tell me it's nothing, then I definitely key on that. Yeah, it is something.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just like, and if somebody is just, in a ripping bad mood, which just sometimes happens, we wake up on the wrong side of the bed and just there's something going on in our brains, and if somebody's not willing to ante up what it is, that's fine, but you as a leader have to say, okay, listen, I know you're having a rough day. Totally get it. Been there myself, but I really need you to dial in. Can you do that for me today?
Hmm.
Can you find a way to separate whatever it is that's going on in your brain and use work as a distraction and then just like get after it?
Yep. Yeah, you have to just recognize, like, and sometimes there might be that somebody needs to step away because they're gonna actually do more damage if they don't, right?
Oh yeah.
And so it's like sometimes it's like, okay, what are my key person? But if they're not on the game, it's like, when you have to make a choice as a coach, it's like, is this guy gonna stay in or is he
Yeah.
not gonna stay in? And like based on what he's doing, he's probably not staying in right now.
And he's not staying in very well. Yeah, on top of it.
And it's hard to do because it's like, oh well, he normally does it. Like, but what's he doing now? What's he doing right now? Right.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of hard because sometimes you do it based on past performance, and you maybe give somebody like too many breaks
Yeah.
without actually figuring out. It's like maybe you need to set them aside and find out what's going on until again. But if you wait till it goes to critical mass, well, then you didn't really. Then it seems very abrupt, right? So it's like
Yep.
you have to have different strategies for different people because not everybody's the same. So I mean, are there certain like archetypes that you look for?
Um well, so not really. I mean, the hardest ones to deal with though, honestly, are narcissists.
Mm,
And there are ways that you can deal with a narcissist. What you were talking about when something gets to critical mass. I had this one woman that I used to work with, and it always seemed to me that the rules of engagement always seemed to change. And she was an individual that she was a self-admitted control freak. I mean, she would
mm,
be the first one to tell you, like, yep, get used to it. This is who I am. Like, okay, that's not going to go over very well. But there was one time where whatever was going on in her mind about me, about what was going on, it got so bad that we all stepped into a meeting to kind of try and sort some things out. And she lost it. I mean, absolutely lost control. So much so that my boss stopped the meeting, pulled her into his office, and you could literally hear her yelling through the walls and the window and the doors.
yeah, that's not.
And we were all just, yeah, we were all just kind of like, whoa. And I'm like, man, I don't think I have ever gotten under somebody's skin like that inadvertently before. Holy, and it wasn't so much me, but it was the stories of, what was coming up for her in her brain. Right.
Yeah, the trigger. Like some people get that trigger, and it's kind of like the road rage thing. It's like you
Yeah.
might not know what was going on.
Yeah.
And it seems like it comes out of the blue, but there's like a lot of things that were building up,
Yeah.
and then suddenly like it looks like it comes out of nowhere, but it's like it usually nothing ever comes usually out of nowhere. There's usually a story behind it.
And it's more often than not that the reason why somebody goes sideways like that is because there's some expectations there that haven't been met. Like, we all have expectations. That's the thing. And if we are controlled by our expectations, then we're not going to have really great relationships at work. It's just, or anywhere for that matter.
Hmm.
If your expectation is X, Y, and Z of me, and I don't produce that, then it's not an alignment at all. And so what's going to happen is either the person that is expecting something of me is going to start, building resentment. Their preferences in life are going to take over. But if you guys have mutual principles about things, then you're operating on the same frequency. And so if somebody is like, well, you're doing this and you're doing this and you're doing this and this is always wrong, and it's like, well, did you ever tell them that? Like, no, they should just know. And I'm like, well, how would they know? That's
How's
so
anybody gonna
bad.
know?
How
Yeah,
are
it's
they
like
going to know?
that's
It's
the
like,
problem. Like
yeah,
the
it's just,
expectations, like even in a marriage, like you
yes,
could have like your wife expects you to do X, but she never tells you, or your
yeah.
husband never tells you, right? And then they get mad and they're mad all week, and it's like, oh, you were supposed to do that. So like, oh, I don't know, I forgot. But
Yeah.
like, it's like it blows up, and it suddenly blows up. It's like, but you didn't tell me. It's like, well, you should have known. It's like, well, how am I going to know if you don't
How would
talk?
I know that? Yeah. How would I possibly know that? It's like, parents, it's like you want your children to like just look at the dishwasher. The dishwasher is a great example. Everybody has this weird way. They all have their way of loading a
Everyone's
dishwasher. And if
nope.
it's not right, they go in and rearrange it, right?
Yeah.
Are your forks pointing up or down? And are the brotherhood of bowls hanging out together, right? And the thing is that once you start teaching your kid how to, load a dishwasher, you have to teach them what your preferred way is. If you don't, they're just going to jam that thing.
They have to do it however they want.
Yeah, there's going to be all sorts of crud all over it. It's like, and then, the thing is like, if you don't like the outcome, don't blame the child for it, right? So it's
Yeah.
the same type of thing when you're communicating with folks, and when you're actually leading a team. It's like, if you don't like the outcome because you haven't communicated what it is you expect, you don't hold your team accountable for that. You're responsible for that.
Yeah, it's kind of like a lot of people didn't realize, well, you measure like the SAT scores of a class in high school, right, or the overall grade, and people say, well, the kids are not capable, but it's really that the teacher isn't capable, because
Mhm.
if 90% of the kids are getting C's and only
Right.
10% of them are getting A's and B's, then that teacher is not good at communicating that lesson plan. But a
Yeah.
lot of times they say, oh, the teacher's great because they got these top 10 kids in the top 10%. But that's not really like, you got to start understanding, like, do you want everybody to be able to win, or you only want 10% of the team to win?
Yeah.
Right? If you can get the majority of the team to be on the same page and win, rather than in the top 10% of the team, then you're going to have a more efficient team.
Yeah. And if
And
they
I don't
win,
know
you
if
win.
people think like
Yeah.
that.
And the thing is that, if you help them win, you win in the end of the day, right? Everybody wins. And and that's the awesome piece about it. And that's how high performing leaders actually think. If I'm helping you win, then we're all going to benefit from it, and there's a lot of things. There's several things that you can do. There's a couple of key things that you can do if you're in this situation where you're realizing that, a lot of what they're talking about makes sense. And yeah, I kind of see that happening in my world. Is that one of the things that we have to get better at doing? So I already mentioned one, and that is ask good questions and you're going to get good answers, right? But we have to get to a point where we listen more and we talk less. We're in a world right now where everybody wants to be heard. And good leaders that get to the heart of big issues have figured out that if you listen more and you talk less, you're going to learn a lot more rather than verbally running over everybody.
Yeah, because if you just have, like, you have a meeting, it's scheduled for an hour, and then the leader goes and makes it go an hour and 45 minutes, and they spent 70% of the time berating the whole team and not listening to any of the analysts or listening to any of the engineers. That's really not a recipe for success,
Mm-mm.
because it's like, okay, you're venting, you went over target for the meeting, and what did you accomplish other than kind of make everybody feel bad? Right? Versus, why don't you do a root cause analysis and figure out what's going wrong,
Yeah.
and ask people, the engineers and the people that experts, to tell you what's going on.
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
And then
You
find
kind of sound
solutions.
like you're talking from experience there.
You know? Yeah, well, yeah. I live in a world where like you either succeed on the project or
Yeah.
you don't. And a
Yeah.
lot of times it's based on the leadership that
Yep.
it's either a leadership that values the people who know how to do the work or has a top-down micromanagement approach and doesn't value the people and think they can just exchange people.
Yep.
And when you have somebody that actually trusts their team and doesn't micromanage and listens, and then lead is a leader when they need to be a leader. But you listen, and like listening is a core skill that I think a lot of people don't learn in business school. They don't learn wherever they need to learn it.
Yeah, in life in general. Yeah, we're about instant gratification. It's interesting. You really kind of had me thinking about something that I've never really talked about before, but I think it's a good moment to talk about it. There's a lot of articles written about this, about trusting your team. I even talk about trusting your team. But here's the thing. You have to bring up a team that is also trustworthy, which means you have to put the right people in the right place. I used to trust my team a long time ago when I was getting my leadership stripes, way, way, way back. I would trust that my team would do the job. The problem is that I didn't have people in position that were trustworthy that I could do it, but I still trusted them. And what happened? Well, we failed, right?
You can get
And
burned.
it wasn't right. And it wasn't until I started either holding people accountable and reminding them that, hey, listen, when you say you're going to do something and you don't do it, that's a problem. And by the way, it's not my problem to fix.
Yeah.
You know,
You own
not
it.
my integrity that's on the line here,
Yeah.
right? And when I started having those conversations with my team, things started to shift a little bit. I didn't get too hung up on, I don't like gossip, but I didn't target that stuff first, especially when I got a new team. I targeted the integrity of the team. I targeted, if you're not mature enough to be here, you're welcome to leave any minute, because you're not going to like what's going to come out, because I'm going to hold your feet to the fire to what it is that you need to do. So you have a choice. You can either be part of something really great, or you can go find something that's a better fit for you. Either way, we're moving forward, right? And so when I started having those types of conversations, what I started to find is that the more I was honest and the more I had those difficult conversations and the less I swept things under the carpet, because let's face it, we all do. We don't like always talking about the difficult, uncomfortable stuff. What happened is that as I was maturing as a leader, my team was maturing as a team.
Yeah, I think a
And
lot yeah, it makes sense. Because
yeah,
if you treat people with respect and you actually have an honest conversation, and you let people know what it is, right?
yeah.
And you let them know that, like, yeah, I'm expecting your A game, right? I'm expecting you to do it. And if you don't feel like you're up to it, but if you
I
never
don't know.
if you don't give people that discussion, it's like if you come in knowing some people aren't up to it and you keep on sweeping it under the rug, you kind of got to right fit the job.
Yeah.
Like, why don't we take the guy that's really good at accounting and send him to accounting instead
Yeah.
of expecting him to do something that he actually can't do?
Yeah.
Right?
Square peg in a round hole.
Like
Right.
we get that all the time because like, oh, he got promoted. Well, he got promoted, but he's really the best at that. That he's
Yeah.
asked me at that. So why are you putting him here?
Yeah.
And it's like then that's I see that in the corporate world all the time. They promote people and they actually put them into the wrong place.
Yeah.
That's the next way to go position to go to, but it's actually the wrong fit. And
Yeah.
then you're out of synergy.
Yeah, you are. And that happens because, like, leaders will see a really good employee and they get promoted because they're a good employee, but they're good at what it is that they're doing. So there's this assumption that because they're good at what it is that they're doing, that they can now take on the new challenge and be a master at it. Well, first off, mastery takes time.
Mhm.
And on top of it, if the person may have the skill set, that doesn't necessarily mean they could be as equally adaptable, because they're going through their own challenges. They're going through their own shift. You take on something new after you've see, this is the whole reason why people hate change, is because change interrupts mastery.
Yeah.
And it's uncomfortable when that happens. Like you feel good and comfortable do like, I know how to do this. I can do this with my eyes closed. This is awesome. I don't have to worry about it. And then all of a sudden change happens. It's like crap.
Yeah.
Now I have to do this. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't like this. It's uncomfortable. And then we have this conversation in our heads about it, right? But there are some people that actually don't transition well into something new. And or
It might take longer than what you have. Like if your
yeah.
project doesn't have the leeway to
Mhm.
give them the opportunity to learn, like, and get that mastery, then it's like a
Yeah.
bad fit. Like if you put somebody and say, okay, it's not mission critical that they get to 100%. They could be at 50%,
Yep. It
right? And
yeah.
still get it done. But like sometimes they get put in a situation where they got to be like 90% and they can't get to 90%.
Not in the time that you need them to. Yeah. And like my early retail years, I was like I'm very mechanically inclined. I'm the fix it I get stuff done. That's what I do. And I get it done in an absurdly fast amount of time. Um and so I was always put in the stores that needed help. Like this store is fledging, the store is failing. I knew how to turn that around. And we would go from like I took over one of my early years. I took over, it was a women's clothing store. The company doesn't even exist anymore. But I came into a mid-level store from a low-level store. So we have A, B, and C stores, and A stores made like 2 million plus a year. No, it was 3 million plus a year. B stores were like 2.5 ish, something like that. And then C stores were under 2 million. And so I was working in a C store and they put me into a broken B store that should have been reclassified as a C store, but it was just a matter of sales. So I came in, they put me in, and we fixed stuff. We fixed our processes. We started getting not the right people in place, but we got the right schedules in place, which made all the
Mhm.
difference in the world. And they were following up with customers, and the customer service was different because my focus was on customer service. And literally in a very short period of time, I pulled us out of a 1.8 million annual sales, and we were trending in 6 months of 2.5 million. So we had this awesome synergy, this awesome momentum that was going. And then what I found out was that I'm not the long-term nurturer leader. I am the go in and fix it type of
Then you
person.
have to go
So
to the next thing.
right. So when I got hired by another retail company many years ago to go in and do exactly the same thing, fix a broken store, and then go into the top store, I realized that my effectiveness was not as strong in the nurturing it and make it a long way. And I didn't necessarily have the love and respect of my team like I did when we were fixing stuff because we were accomplishing things,
Yeah,
right?
it's way harder to get the
Yeah,
gains. Like, when you
yeah,
get to the top level to make that gain, probably takes a lot more effort.
it does.
It takes it made a different strategy than if
Yeah,
something's like if you're somebody that goes and fixes the broken thing, well, you
yeah,
can recognize what's broken. When something's working, it's tweaking it,
yeah,
and tweaking it is a different skill than
yes.
fixing it.
Right. Maintaining. So once you got gains and then maintaining gains, that's a whole different ball game too. That's an entirely different leadership strategy. How do you keep people motivated? And that wasn't my thing because there was nothing to fix. And so I found myself feeling it literally like a failure. I didn't have the respect of the people like I did when while we were winning and achieving. And so, it took me quite a while to figure out, well, how do you be the long-term nurturer? Because it is a different strategy. And so, you know, that is a really good example of somebody putting me in a position. I had to learn that. But if we had to do something by a certain timeline and that need for me to be more of a nurturer, the need was shorter. And like I needed a much longer runway for that.
Mhm, yeah.
And
I mean,
I
that's the
probably
thing
would
is
have failed. Yeah.
yeah, it's good to know yourself. Like, a lot of times people like you figure you know yourself based on what you've been doing.
Yep.
But the problem is, like, you get put into that new environment and a new challenge, like
Yeah.
you might not be at 80% in that new
Yeah.
environment. You might just be barely 55. And you're like, well, I used to be able to turn this and make it like 80. And
Mhm.
and it's like not every situation is the same. And so I think a lot of people just want to see that growth always on the up. And the thing
Yep.
is, like life is like, you're the captain in a boat. It's like it's not always going to be smooth sailing. Sometimes there's going to be a place that is not easy to navigate,
Yep.
and you got
Absolutely.
to just kind of get through, right? And everybody has to learn. It's like we're going through this whole AI era now, and a lot of jobs are getting like terminated. I mean, they're getting replaced by the technology. We've got a lot of robotics, a lot of innovation. That's
Mhm.
like, if you get a system that it allows somebody to get to market 80% faster,
Yeah.
right? Then all those analysts that used to work on the thing that was 8% slower, but they don't have a job anymore.
Yeah.
So it's like you have to kind of go into a new zone. You have to be able to get into new areas where you're not always going to be at the right ramp level. So I don't know if there's expectations from management. Like you see a lot of jobs on the job services. They want people who have the exact acronym, the exact
Mhm.
skill set. And they say that most jobs, 90% of jobs, you could train somebody how to do it without them having that certificate. They
Oh,
could probably
yeah.
afford it. But
I'd say if
people
you have the right person.
are so into just having the skill set. But if you look at somebody like, what if you had somebody that's traveled for 20 years, they've been international, they've been different, like jobs, they've been banking, they've been retail, they've been, science, they've been all over the place. Just because they don't have X qualification doesn't mean they couldn't do it. But
Yeah.
you have these things screening out the potential of people without even asking them or not even having an interview.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of missed opportunities because we're using some of our tech in a
Yeah.
bad way. It's not putting the right people in the right places. It's
Yeah.
thinking because people have certain things that they actually are the right person without actually having that human connection and talking to that person to see if they actually do have it.
Yeah. And so what you're demonstrating, since I've been out of Fortune 500 now for a while, is, and so I've worked for 6 Fortune 500 companies. You are like, a lot of the stuff that you're talking about is very much a Fortune 500 type of mindset. And a lot of small businesses don't have this. And a lot of people have a misconception of what corporate is. And when you're in a Fortune 500 company, there is a lot of education that goes into this very progressive mindset that you're actually, showing and demonstrating. And that is asking these critical questions. Are we putting the right people in the right spot? What is it that we need to do in order to stay strategically competitive and have a strategic competitive advantage in the market? How do we get there faster? What do we do with all these other, right? So thank you. It's pretty cool to be, talking to somebody who has these old mindsets that I used to be surrounded with all the time, which is pretty amazing. Um, but you know what? There is one other thing that I want to share that is absolutely key and critical. And if there's anybody out there who's listening to this and feels like they're being a fledgling leader right now, I'm going to tell you right now that the power of your leadership will always lie in your follow up. I
Mm.
used to work with a guy who is awesome at this, and this is how I learned it. Anytime one of his employees would come up to him and they say, "Hey, Mike, we think we've got a recommendation for this," he go, "Okay, great," and he would run it up the line, and he would run it up through the corporate ladder, and he would get an answer. Here's the thing that differentiated him from everybody else, because believe it or not, there's a lot of leaders out there that will, whether they're corporate or small business or whatever, they'll run your suggestions up the line. What is missing is what he used to do, and that was communicating back to the employee when the answer came back down the line, because
Oh,
it will come back down too.
yeah.
And I know you've seen this, right? So, but the loyalty that this man built because of this one thing that he did, and he would say, "Listen, I just got word back on that suggestion that you made. They told me to tell you that they appreciated it. They liked the idea. They're using a small piece of this, but not all of it. because it doesn't completely fit, but they're going to take this part and they're going to run with it. Do you know what that did to that one employee? It made him feel like $1 million. And
Yeah.
it was legit. It was honest. It was truthful. It was authentic. And if he had to come back and say, you know what, they like the suggestion, however, they don't have the time, the resources, the money, or whatever it was, right? They're going to go ahead and hang on to that for a little while. And when it seems like a good fit, they're going to reevaluate it.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a different.
And then when somebody did have an idea that was an absolute bell ringer and they went for it, he celebrated it with everybody. He'd say, hey, just want to give, they would actually do what was called a positive write-up. And they would take the coaching forms that we would use normally for disciplinary actions and reverse it. And
Yeah.
so he would write up, right, an
Brilliant.
accommodation, right. And then would do it in their weekly meeting. It's like, such and such had this amazing idea. Corporate is actually going to take it and run with it. They're doing this and blah, blah, blah. It made all the difference in the world because every time, and it never held back ingenuity. Everybody kept like coming up with something new because they understood that this is an environment where we're here to win and not use ego to judge and keep everybody down.
Yeah, I mean, because the problem if you have a very hierarchical kind of workplace and you never get the ideas from the floor,
Yeah.
you never let like the guys who actually work on it, right? You only take it from the people who are in the room with you, right? But not
Yeah.
everybody that's outside the room, right?
Yep.
So a lot of ideas are outside that room, right? But they never get communicated or they never have an advocate, like you're saying. Like if you have an advocate, they'll take the idea from the floor
Yep.
and bring it to the room and then be honest about giving the feedback that they actually got it. You're going to get more people from the floor. And the floor is like, that's where people see what's going on. It's like, oh, this
Yeah.
isn't working. It
Yeah.
might take months for people to know, but if you're actually listening, you'll find out like, hey, that's not working, or this could go better. And
Yep.
if you're not willing to listen to that, because say, well, we told you to do it this way, you must be doing it wrong. Instead of listening, it's like, well, maybe you need to actually adjust it, not that they put it on the people on the floor to say, oh, they're doing it wrong. So
Yep.
we don't have to hear anything they're saying because they're just not doing it, implementing it right.
Yeah. And the thing is that when there's that up and down communication, when it doesn't happen, and leaders don't follow up and leaders don't convey and communicate and relay, what happens is my number one live and die rule kicks into place. And that is in the absence of information, people make stuff up. Yep. And it's never positive. Yeah. Yo, totally. And but the thing is that, humans, we don't like ambiguity. We don't, when we hear something and it leaves us hanging and we don't have like a solid story around it, we'll make one up because we have to fill in that blank.
Yeah. Well, if you're feeling that it's like, well, management doesn't listen. Management, right. Is closed-minded. They're not cutting edge. They're kind of like stuck in the past. That's going to get on the floor and everybody's going to say, well, there's no point in me doing it because if they're closed-minded, they're never going to take this.
Yeah.
I might as well just go to the other company down the street.
Yeah.
Because they're going to take it, right? Yeah. So you lose people. You wonder why you're losing people, why there's turnover, because you're not responsive, right? You're not connected. It's like if you have a custom shop where everybody's kind of artisan, you respect those artisans.
Yeah.
But if you get to like automation, everybody's just a widget, a cog in the machine, then you don't respect it because I can just replace the cog.
Or
so if you have that mindset where everybody's actually like an artisan level, then you respect what they say.
Yeah. or the people that do exit are the top talent, and the people that stay are the not your steady eddies. They're like so you lose your top talents and then you keep your toxic ones, right?
Yeah.
And so it all comes down to, one of the biggest things that I've seen when it comes to that number one live and die rule in the absence of information that people make stuff up is that for some reason, people seem to think that they know what other people think about them. And, if and I know you've heard this, It's like, well, such and such thinks that I'm this, blah, blah, blah. Well, did they say that? Well, no, but I know that's what they think. And it's like, how do you know what's in their head? You don't know you have no idea what's going on. You don't know if they had a flat tire on the way into work. You have no idea what their family dynamic is like. You have no idea. But our insecurities create this. And so it's this constant complexity. And here's the thing about when people make stuff up, people will look for reasons in the world to why something is. So if we have it in our mindset that nobody likes us, right? And we can literally go out and look for the evidence and find it to substantiate that, right?
Same thing.
Yeah, same thing at work. So if we think that somebody doesn't like us because they're not talking to us, where that person could just basically be an introvert and just be like completely done with the day, and they don't respond to you, you can go and look for that evidence and actually find it, but you're going to be wrong.
Yeah, because everybody has a different, they could have neurodivergence, or they could be, just the way that person is. They're not good at communicating, right? And so they're not overtly friendly. They could be thinking mean they don't like you. Else. Yeah, they just like they're not like a people person. Some people are not, or they're having a bad day in that day, that moment.
Or they could just simply be busy, know? It's amazing what we do as human beings. And this is one of the reasons why I really like working with leaders, because I get to challenge them on this mindset. Like, if you're a leader, like I used to have a client years ago who was always, I'm going to say this, it's going to sound a little crass, but he would always get his colon in a knot about what his employees were doing outside of work. And I finally asked him, I'm like, what does that have to do with their ability to perform the essential function of their role? And he goes, well, nothing. And I'm like, why are you wasting energy on it? It doesn't matter. And as soon as I said it, he goes, what the hell am I doing? Why am I thinking? I'm like, I don't know. Stop it.
Yeah, because if you kind of set an expectation, right, for your employees, like, well, you guys can't be doing, like, you can't have a rock band, like, you can't have a employee rock band, because that's like not appropriate. Because my mind says I don't think it's appropriate, because you're wasting time. Because you could be doing, but people need to blow off steam. Like what's the difference between somebody who's in a bar band with a bunch of guys, right, and guy who's playing rugby or something? They're just doing whatever they're doing to blow off steam. What's the problem?
Yeah, so they take a day off, and then you stalk them on Facebook. It's like, why are you doing that? They have PTO that they legitimately earned. Let them go take a day off. That's why they have it, right? Yeah, and it was just like, some people do that. They just start, nobody likes to be misled. I totally get that. And sometimes when employees want to take time off, they just don't come out and tell you the truth. They come up with an excuse because they don't want to deal with your response, or they don't want to be told no. So they'll say, well, I'm sick. And then, we see them on Instagram, posting stuff, right?
That's the greatest thing to do.
Right, exactly. They're at, at an Alanis Morissette concert or something that they bought.
I'm taking PTO. The best thing is say, I'm taking PTO. It's not a sick day, just I'm taking the PTO. Right. You keep it kind of vague.
Right.
And then it's like, that's what it is. Right. But
but
people
we forget.
they want to, it's if I say I'm sick, then they're going to let me take it.
Yeah. And, and that's the thing, is that some people are just, they're not willing, if they want to go and do something, or they need to take a brain break, and, they need to go live or off gas or whatever. And there's going to, they fear the judgment of saying, listen, I'm going to take a day off or something and I think the first time I took a day off in 3 years, my boss was like, well, I was wondering when you were going to do it. Yeah. I'm like, listen, I am fried. And I called her up and I said, I'm fried. I'm brain fried. I need to take a mental break today. She goes, go for it, but, not, and again, that comes back down to that comment around maturity that I was telling you about. When you have a mature team and you have a team that you can trust because that's what you've nurtured and that's what you've developed, then if somebody says, well, I'm going to take a PTO day, there's no questioning as to what is going on. Nobody's feeling misled. Everybody's being upfront and open. And if you have a mature leader that says, okay, so you're doing this in a critical time for this particular project, can we renegotiate and have you take another day instead? And if you don't do that, and then you resent the person for taking the time off, that's on you. That's not on the person. I had worked with a team of engineers, and we were right in the middle of a critical launch, and we had one of them that had planned a vacation for months and told everybody about it, and he took his vacation. He didn't sacrifice his vacation during this launch because it kept getting, pushed to the right, pushed to the right, pushed to the right. And it's like he decided to show up for the main event and watch it from the sidelines, and he got seen, and his bosses were really ticked off about it. And I'm like, but you approved his time off.
That's approved. You got to have it sometimes. That's the real
Yeah.
problem. You have the key person dependency. You always want them there, and sometimes you're gonna burn them out, and so at some point you have to accept that they're human, right? And so they got to have some kind of rest. It's like any artist we know. I can't just rehearse. There's a point where you let it go as a musician, and you just trust that you know it, right?
Yeah.
And you take time.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't do anything. You have to stop. If you're athletes and musicians, they all know, but I think a lot of people who get stuck in, they're in a job, they don't realize you need that kind of downtime. And people get on the train, they think they just got to be on it all the time. It's like you have to.
Yeah.
And the bosses need to understand it. Everybody needs to communicate it.
Let off the train. Yeah.
Sometimes you need that space.
Yeah. And if you're the boss that's approving the time off, don't get upset when your people take the time off because you're the one approving it. That again, that's leadership, right? You're the one that allowed it, and if somebody's taking excess time and you don't say anything about it, and all you do is sit there and, get frustrated and kind of, a friend of mine says this, he says, sit in your poopy diaper about it. It's like, but you're the one that's allowing it to happen. And, and that's an immature mindset to have. And so you need to have levels of maturity when it comes to leadership, because if you don't, you're just kind of leader. And I've done all this stuff too. I mean, I'm not sitting here on a soapbox. I'm actually talking from my own personal experience. I've made every single mistake that I've talked about. And, but the thing is that you have to recognize it for what it is. You got to give yourself some grace. I mean, leadership is hard. It's lonely. If everybody, if it was easy, everybody would do it, right? We would be leading each other all over the place. And that's not the case. We need our leaders. But we're also coming into a new day and age where leadership isn't as what it once was. We've got two very different generations that leaders of, our experience and our time frame. We have to figure out how to work with this younger crowd that has a completely different view. Mindset. Right. We thought, and people are like, oh man, we thought millennials were a challenge. Z is even more of a challenge because they did not turn out how the generational studies actually predicted them to turn. They were predicting that they were going to be more like Gen X. That is not the case.
Yeah.
Far from it.
I know a lot of them are I know my daughter, she's like an entrepreneur, and I know a lot of people that they don't really want to work in the corporate structure. They do a lot of things. They're more entrepreneurial spirit, or they're willing to do things and not exactly follow the same path that was followed before. And their expectations of leadership and managers or management is a different mindset. A different, not willing maybe to hold their tongue in the meeting. They're more willing to actually speak their mind, and then people's like, well, how where are they coming from? It's like,
and they haven't had the life lessons yet to speak it well. And
maybe they don't speak it the right way.
We'll just put that pin in that one. But and that's where, And that's where this, our generation of leadership is like, listen, a lot of people will start losing their identity as a leader because they think they have to manage everybody differently. You manage everybody to the same expectations. Your approach is what's different.
Hmm.
So, and that is a very big lesson that a lot of people haven't yet figured out. And I lost my identity as a leader not a while ago, when I found myself being a different version of a leader instead of being what the company needed, what my people needed, and just approaching everybody from the same expectation, but just a different avenue. So just a different avenue, right? So hold everybody the same expectations, and that's how you prevent, um, the perception of special favors and all that other stuff,
Oh yeah,
favoritism and whatnot. Everybody's held to the same expectation, but it doesn't mean that I talk to somebody exactly the same way. The message is the same. The
yeah,
approach is slightly different.
yeah. Because everybody's an individual, and how they, you start to, yeah, like I said, you read the room.
Yeah.
The situational awareness is very critical. But if people go to yobrenda.com, what do they find there? What do they connect to
Oh, I'm
you,
glad
you
you
with there?
asked. I'm glad you asked that question. So, I've talked about how I like to help leaders slice through that drama so that way they can scale and grow their team to new levels of success. If you connect with me at yobrenda.com, I'm going to give everybody who's a listener here a free gift. And it's a little class called Impact Scripts. And these are the actual words that you can use and say that are extremely effective, because let me tell you something, I have screwed them all up. And I have used these words for many, many, many years, these phrases that will help. And I give a lot of context as to how and when to use them and why they work, and all sorts of stuff. So that is my gift to everybody listening. If they go to yobrenda.com, tell me, tell me when you sign in what it is that you heard today that, really resonated with you, and you get this free Impact Scripts course.
That's awesome. Well, we do
Thanks.
appreciate when guests have like that type of incentive, and I think that's really cool. And
Thank
like
you.
I said before at the beginning of the podcast, that link will be fully clickable
Yep.
on all the platforms that we were just on: Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. We're gonna be all the most of the platforms that where you can listen to or watch a podcast by tomorrow, like Apple and Spotify. And I do want to thank you for being a guest on the Family Electric Coach podcast. I do appreciate the time you took to talk to us today about all these ideas about leadership and communication.
Well, thank you so much for having it on. I really liked our conversation. It was nice to be in a Fortune 500 friendly environment. I said again, somebody who gets it.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm an artist, but I understand that side
That's
because, like,
okay.
I'm not a starving artist. I work on the side, so I
I
gotta
love
have
it.
money to buy my
Your
keyboards.
toys.
So, all right, thank you very much.
Thank
Have a good
you.
night.